It doesn't make sense at first glance, and that's exactly why this story has people across the league paying very close attention. Because when a team makes a quiet adjustment to the contract of someone like Myles Garrett, not just any player, but arguably the most dominant defensive force in football right now, it's never just a technical move. It's never just paperwork. This is a franchise cornerstone, a player who changes entire game plans before the ball is even snapped. And yet the Cleveland Browns made a decision that, on the surface, looks small, but underneath carries massive implications. They didn't lock him in when they had the chance. They didn't close the door. Instead, they shifted the timing, delayed the commitment, and in doing so, they created something that wasn't there before: flexibility. And in the NFL, flexibility at this level doesn't happen by accident. Because here's the reality that nobody can ignore. If Cleveland had simply followed the original structure of that contract and paid Garrett what he was owed on schedule, this entire conversation wouldn't exist. There would be no trade speculation, no rumors connecting him to other franchises, no late-night debates about his future. It would be over before it even started. But that's not what happened. The Browns made a very deliberate choice to push that decision further down the timeline, and that single move has completely changed the way people inside the league are reading this situation. Suddenly, what looked stable doesn't feel so secure anymore. Suddenly, the idea of Garrett wearing a different uniform isn't crazy, it's possible. And once that possibility enters the conversation, everything shifts. And what makes this even more intense is the timing of it all. This didn't happen in a vacuum. This move landed right as whispers around the league were starting to pick up, right as certain teams began positioning themselves quietly behind the scenes, and right as questions about Cleveland's long-term vision started getting harder to ignore. You don't make a decision like this unless you are at least considering multiple paths forward. That's what makes this situation so fascinating, and honestly, a little unsettling if you're a Browns fan. Because this isn't just about money, it's not just about cap space or contract structure. This is about direction. It's about whether this organization truly believes its current timeline aligns with Garrett's prime, or if they're preparing for something much bigger, something that requires a bold and potentially controversial move. So now the conversation shifts from what happened to why it happened. Why would a team hesitate, even slightly, when it comes to securing a player of this caliber? Why create even the smallest window of uncertainty when you could have shut it completely? And more importantly, if that door is now open, even just a little, who exactly is on the other side of it? Because once you start connecting the dots, once you start looking at the teams with the resources, the motivation, and the timing to make a move like this happen, a very different picture begins to form. And trust me, the deeper this goes, the more it feels like this isn't just a contract adjustment. It feels like the beginning of something that could reshape an entire franchise. It started with a move that, to most people scrolling through off-season updates, looked completely routine. No headlines screaming urgency, no breaking news banners. Just a simple contract adjustment involving Myles Garrett and the Cleveland Browns. The kind of update that usually gets grouped in with dozens of others and forgotten within minutes. But this one was different, not because of what it said on the surface, but because of what it quietly changed underneath. The Browns didn't touch the total value of the deal. They didn't restructure years or reduce guarantees. Instead, they made one very specific adjustment. They moved the timing of Myles Garrett's massive option bonus. Originally, that payment was set to hit early in the league year. Now it's been pushed all the way back to just before the regular season begins. And that single shift changes everything. Because in the NFL, timing is leverage. Timing is control. When a team commits to paying a bonus like that early, it effectively locks the player into place. It closes off flexibility, eliminates trade scenarios, and signals to the entire league that this player is not going anywhere. But by delaying that payment, Cleveland did the exact opposite. They didn't remove the commitment, they postponed it. And in doing so, they created a window, a very real, very strategic window where options still exist, where conversations can still happen, where possibilities that should have been shut down are suddenly still alive. And what makes this even more interesting is how quietly it was done. There was no big announcement explaining the reasoning, no detailed breakdown from the front office, just a subtle change in contract language that only people paying close attention would fully understand. And that's usually how the most important moves happen in this league, not loudly, but deliberately. Because when a team wants to maintain flexibility without drawing too much attention, they make precise ones, small adjustments that don't look like much at first until you realize what they actually allow. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Because this wasn't just about adjusting a payment date. This was about keeping options open at a time when most teams would be doing the exact opposite. It was about delaying a decision that could have easily been finalized. And when a franchise hesitates to fully commit to a player of Garrett's caliber, even just for a moment, it raises a much bigger question that nobody inside that building is openly answering. If this was such an easy decision, why didn't they just make it? This is where the situation stops looking routine and starts looking intentional. Because if the Cleveland Browns truly wanted to shut down every possible distraction, every rumor, every outside conversation, they had the perfect opportunity to do it. All they had to do was follow the original contract structure and pay Myles Garrett that massive option bonus on schedule. That one move would have slammed the door completely. No trade discussions, no speculation, no teams calling to check in. It would have sent a clear, unmistakable message across the league. Garrett is untouchable. End of story. But instead of taking that path, the simple, definitive path, they chose something else entirely. They left the door open. And not by accident, because in the NFL, decisions like this are never made without understanding the consequences. Front offices know exactly how contract timing affects leverage. They know how other teams interpret these signals. And they definitely know that delaying a payment of that size doesn't just create flexibility internally, it invites external interest. It tells the rest of the league without ever saying a word that there is at least a scenario where this player could become available. Not guaranteed, not even likely, but possible. And in a league where elite talent almost never hits the market, possible is all it takes to spark serious conversations behind closed doors. What makes this even more telling is that Cleveland didn't need to do this. This wasn't a cap emergency. This wasn't a desperate financial maneuver. This was a choice, a calculated decision to keep their options alive instead of locking everything down. And when a team hesitates like that with a player of Garrett's caliber, it suggests something deeper is being evaluated. Maybe it's timing, maybe it's roster direction, maybe it's the realization that by the time the rest of the team is ready to compete at the highest level, Garrett could be on the other side of his prime. Whatever the reason, the hesitation is there. And in the NFL, hesitation always means something. And now, because of that decision, the entire dynamic has changed. Teams around the league aren't looking at Cleveland the same way anymore. They're watching, they're waiting. Some of them are probably already preparing offers just in case that window stays open long enough to act. Because when a franchise doesn't fully commit when it has the chance, it creates opportunity for everyone else. And that leads to the most uncomfortable question of all. If the Browns didn't close the door when they could have, are they actually preparing to walk through it? And this is where the conversation takes a turn that a lot of people aren't openly saying, but plenty are quietly thinking. Because around the league, there's a growing belief that this decision might not have been driven solely by the Browns. There's real speculation, and it's important to be clear, this is what insiders are suggesting, not confirming, that Myles Garrett and his representation may have played a role in pushing for this exact kind of flexibility. And when you actually step back and look at his situation, it starts to make a lot more sense than people might want to admit. Garrett is not just another star player chasing a contract. He's already secured that. He's already proven everything there is to prove on an individual level. Defensive Player of the Year, record-breaking production, year after year of dominance that forces entire offenses to adjust just to survive. At this stage of his career, the conversation naturally shifts. It's no longer about recognition. It's about legacy. It's about meaningful games deep into the season. It's about competing when it matters most. And while Cleveland has had moments of promise, the reality is they haven't consistently delivered that stage for him. For a player in his prime, entering what should be the most impactful years of his career, that matters more than ever. So when a situation like this presents itself, a chance to quietly create options without making a public demand, without forcing headlines, without burning bridges, why wouldn't you at least explore it?
That's the part that makes this feel strategic rather than accidental. Because this isn't a holdout, this isn't a public trade request. This is subtle, controlled, the kind of move that keeps everything professional on the surface while still giving you room to maneuver if the right opportunity comes along. And in today's NFL, that kind of quiet leverage is often more powerful than any statement made in front of a microphone. What also stands out is the timing from Garrett's perspective. He's at that point where every season carries weight. Every year that passes without a serious postseason run becomes harder to ignore. And while loyalty to a franchise is respected, players at this level also understand the reality of the league. Windows are short, and opportunities don't wait. If there's even a chance to position yourself somewhere that aligns better with winning right now, that conversation is going to happen, whether it's public or not.
And if that conversation is happening behind the scenes, then the contract adjustment suddenly looks very different. It doesn't look like a team casually managing finances anymore. It looks like a coordinated move that benefits both sides. The Browns maintain flexibility, Garrett keeps his options open, and the rest of the league? They're left watching closely, knowing that something bigger could be developing just out of sight. And once you accept that possibility, one destination starts to stand out more than any other. And that's where one team keeps coming up over and over again. Not randomly, not forced, but naturally. The Dallas Cowboys. Because when you line up all the factors, the timing, the need, the financial structure, and most importantly, the personal connection, this isn't just another hypothetical landing spot. This is the kind of situation that actually makes sense from every angle. Garrett isn't just linked to Dallas because they're a big-name franchise. He's tied to that area on a personal level. Texas isn't just a place on the map for him, it's home. And when players reach this stage of their career, those connections start to matter in ways they didn't earlier on. But beyond the emotional side, the football logic here is what really grabs attention. Dallas has consistently shown that they are willing to be aggressive when it comes to elite defensive talent. They don't shy away from big moves, especially when it comes to players who can completely shift the balance of a game. And adding someone like Garrett wouldn't just improve their defense, it would transform it. You're talking about pairing one of the most disruptive pass rushes in the league with an already dangerous defensive front. That's the kind of move that doesn't just make you better, it makes you feared. Then there's the financial piece, which might be the most overlooked part of this entire scenario. Because of how this contract is structured, and more importantly because of that delayed bonus, any team trading for Garrett wouldn't be taking on an impossible burden right away. The cap hit in the immediate term becomes surprisingly manageable for a player of his caliber. And that's what turns this from a fantasy idea into something very real. When elite talent becomes even slightly affordable, every serious contender at least considers making a call. And Dallas is one of the few teams positioned to not just consider it, but potentially execute it. Now, to be clear, nothing is guaranteed here. There's no official confirmation, no public negotiation, no deal sitting on the table waiting to be signed. But the connection isn't being pulled out of nowhere either. Around the league, this is a scenario people are taking seriously because the pieces line up too cleanly to ignore. The player, the team, the timing, the structure, it all fits in a way that doesn't feel forced. And if Dallas is truly in the mix, then this stops being just a Cleveland story. It becomes a league-wide situation. Because once one serious contender shows interest in a player like Garrett, it doesn't stay quiet for long. Other teams start evaluating, other front offices start asking questions, and suddenly what started as a small contract adjustment begins to look like the early stages of something much bigger. But here's the twist nobody expected. Cleveland might actually be okay with that. And this is where the entire situation flips from a reactive move to something that looks a lot more like a long-term strategy. Because if you zoom out and look at what the Browns have been doing beyond just the Myles Garrett situation, a very specific pattern starts to emerge. This isn't just about one player. This is about positioning the franchise for a future window that might not fully align with the present. And one of the biggest clues came from something that at first seemed completely unrelated. Reports that Cleveland was pushing for a league rule change that would allow teams to trade draft picks up to 5 years in advance. Now think about that for a second.
Teams don't randomly push for rule changes like that unless they see a scenario where it directly benefits them, especially something this specific. Expanding the ability to deal future picks isn't about short-term fixes, it's about setting up massive, multi-year moves. And when you connect that idea to the possibility of moving Garrett, the picture becomes a lot clearer. Because if Cleveland were to entertain offers for him, they wouldn't be looking for a standard return. They'd be aiming for something historic, the kind of package that reshapes a roster for years, not just seasons. And that's where the whispers start getting really interesting.
There's been growing talk, again, nothing confirmed, but definitely circulating, that a deal involving Garrett could bring back multiple first-round picks, potentially centered around the 2027 draft, and that specific year is not being mentioned by accident. Around scouting circles, the 2027 class is already being projected as one of the most loaded quarterback groups in recent memory. Not just depth, but potential top-end talent that could change franchises overnight. And if Cleveland positions itself correctly, they wouldn't just be entering that draft, they'd be controlling it. Now layer that on top of what they're already building. You have Shedeur Sanders developing within the system, a young quarterback with massive upside and growing confidence. You're investing heavily in protection, in structure, in giving him the environment to succeed. But at the same time, you're not limiting your options. You're creating a scenario where if something even bigger presents itself in that 2027 class, you have the assets to go get it. No hesitation, no restrictions. That's not indecision, that's calculated flexibility at the highest level. And that's what makes this feel less like a difficult choice and more like a deliberate setup. Because if you can turn one elite player into multiple premium assets, align those assets with a potentially historic draft class, and still continue developing your current quarterback in the meantime, you're not just rebuilding, you're stacking possibilities. You're giving yourself multiple paths to success instead of committing to just one. And when you look at it that way, the Garrett situation stops being just about whether they should trade him. It becomes about whether this is the moment that defines the next decade of the franchise. And that's where things start to get uncomfortable, because even the smartest plan comes with a cost. And this is the part that nobody inside the building is going to say out loud, because it's the part that makes this entire plan feel dangerous. For all the logic, all the long-term vision, all the draft capital discussions, there's one reality that doesn't go away. Removing Myles Garrett from this team changes everything immediately, not gradually, not over time, instantly. You're not just losing a great player, you're losing the centerpiece of your entire defense, the one presence that forces every offense to adjust before the game even begins. The player who turns average plays into drive killers, who creates pressure without needing help, who makes everyone else on that side of the ball look better simply by being on the field. And there is no replacing that. There's no draft pick, no free agent, no scheme adjustment that can replicate what Garrett brings. You can try to distribute production across multiple players, you can hope for development, you can invest in depth, but the reality is, players like him don't come around often. He's the kind of talent teams spend decades trying to find, and Cleveland already has him. That's what makes this decision so difficult to fully justify in the short term, because the moment he's gone, the entire identity of that defense shifts. Opposing offenses don't have to game plan the same way. Quarterbacks have more time, coordinators have more freedom, and suddenly a unit that once felt intimidating starts to look manageable. But here's where the internal debate gets complicated, because while the short-term drop-off is obvious, the Browns aren't necessarily operating with a win-now-at-all-costs mindset. Not yet. This roster is still being shaped around a developing quarterback, still building consistency, still trying to establish a foundation that can actually sustain success instead of chasing it for a single season. And when you look at it through that lens, keeping Garrett might not perfectly align with where the team is in its timeline. By the time everything else is fully ready, the offense, the system, the depth, there's a chance Garrett is no longer at this exact peak level. That's not a criticism of him, that's just the reality of how quickly things move in this league. So now you're faced with a decision that no front office ever wants to make.
Do you hold on to elite talent and accept that the rest of the roster might not be ready to fully capitalize on it? Or do you make the uncomfortable move, trade that talent at maximum value, and try to build something that peaks all at once later on? There's no perfect answer, just two very different risks.
One is immediate and visible, losing your best player and taking a step back defensively. The other is delayed and uncertain, passing on a potential franchise-altering return and hoping you didn't miss your window. And that's the tension sitting at the center of all of this. Because as smart as the long-term plan might look on paper, it only works if everything else goes exactly right. And that leads to a scenario that feels almost unreal, but is starting to gain more attention than anyone expected. And this is where the conversation crosses from strategic into something that feels almost unreal, because there's a scenario being talked about, quietly, cautiously, but consistently, that could take everything we've discussed and elevate it to an entirely different level. It revolves around one name: Arch Manning. Now, to be clear, nothing about this is confirmed. This is purely speculation, the kind of idea that starts in scouting circles and slowly builds traction as people connect possibilities. But the fact that it's even being discussed tells you how big the Browns might be thinking right now. Because if Cleveland does go through with a move involving Myles Garrett, and if that move brings back the kind of draft capital people believe it could, suddenly they're not just participants in the 2027 draft, they're in control of it. Multiple first-round picks, flexibility to move anywhere on the board, the ability to outbid any other team if there's a quarterback they truly believe is generational. And that's where the Manning name changes everything. Arch isn't just another top prospect, he carries a legacy that stretches across decades of football history, tied to one of the most recognizable families the sport has ever seen. That kind of presence doesn't just impact a roster, it reshapes the identity of a franchise overnight. Now imagine pairing that possibility with what Cleveland already has in Shedeur Sanders, a young quarterback with star power, confidence, and a growing national profile. You're not just talking about competition at that point, you're talking about a storyline that would dominate the entire league. Two high-profile quarterbacks, two completely different paths, two massive followings, all converging in one place. It wouldn't just be about who wins the starting job, it would be about everything surrounding it, the attention, the expectations, the pressure. The kind of situation that turns every game into a national event, whether the team is contending or not. And again, it's important to frame this for what it is, a possibility, not a plan set in stone. There are too many variables, too many unknowns, too much time between now and that draft for anything to be guaranteed. But in the NFL, the most impactful moves often start as ideas that seem unrealistic at first. They start as what-if conversations before they become real decisions. And right now, this is one of those ideas that people around the league aren't dismissing. Because if Cleveland is truly thinking long-term, if they're willing to make bold moves to reshape their future, then a scenario like this isn't impossible. It's just waiting for the right pieces to fall into place. And if even part of this comes together, it wouldn't just change the Browns, it would change the entire conversation around the NFL. And when you strip everything back, the rumors, the speculation, the possibilities, this all comes down to one decision that will define the direction of the entire franchise. What do the Cleveland Browns truly want to be over the next 5 years? Because the situation surrounding Myles Garrett has forced that question into the spotlight in a way that can't be avoided anymore. This isn't just about a contract tweak or off-season flexibility. This is about identity. This is about whether you hold on to a generational defensive talent and try to compete in the present, or whether you make the uncomfortable move, cash in at peak value, and build towards something potentially even bigger down the line. And the reality is, there are only a few ways this plays out, but every single one of them carries serious consequences. Option 1. They move him. Whether it's to the Dallas Cowboys or another contender that comes out of nowhere with an overwhelming offer, Cleveland pulls the trigger and secures a historic return. Multiple first-round picks, long-term flexibility, and a clear commitment to building for the future. It's bold, it's risky, and if it works, it could set this franchise up for sustained success in a way they haven't experienced in decades. Option 2, they keep him. They close the door they left open, commit fully, and push forward with Garrett as the centerpiece of their defense. That path sends a different message, that this team believes it can compete sooner rather than later, that they're not willing to sacrifice elite talent for uncertain future value. It's the safer choice emotionally, but it comes with its own pressure, because if you keep a player like Garrett, the expectation is simple. You have to win, and not eventually, soon. And then there's the third outcome, the one nobody sees coming. Another team steps in, changes the market completely, and forces Cleveland into a decision they didn't originally plan for. Because once a player of this caliber even becomes remotely available, things can escalate quickly. One aggressive front office, one unexpected offer, and suddenly the entire situation shifts overnight. But no matter which path this takes, one thing is already clear. This story is far from over. Because that small contract adjustment didn't just delay a payment, it started a conversation. A conversation about timing, about ambition, about whether this franchise is ready to make a move that could redefine everything. And until that question is answered, every team will be watching, every insider will be listening, and every new development will matter. So now it comes down to this. Do you hold on to greatness and try to win now? Or do you trade it and take a chance on building something even bigger?